Hey guys and girls, today we're going to do a pre-flight video of the Sling TSi. Some things to think about before pre-flighting an airplane. Firstly, the pre-flight is a part of the flight. By regulation and by common sense, a pre-flight check is required for every flight. So this should be treated with the same diligence and focus that you would treat any other part of the flight. For example, if you were on final approach to land, and your passenger was trying to show you a video on YouTube on his or her phone, that would be an appropriate time to say, please wait while I finish this landing. And the pre-flight check is just as critical as any other part of the flight. And actually, an argument could be made that you should be able to log that as flight time, but we won't go there. That's a step too far. We have to have a moment where we switch our brains into flight mode for commencing the pre-flight check. In other words, we don't want to be doing the pre-flight check while having a conversation with our buddies, while sending text messages, while taking a phone call, because we're not flying yet. We want to have a moment before the pre-flight starts where we check in with ourselves and make sure that we're in a good condition for flight. Acronyms like I am safe are used, but hopefully any good pilot knows themselves enough to recognize when they're under stress from external or internal sources, if they're rushed, if they are having some kind of psychological or emotional difficulty, extra stress at work or in life. Have you eaten? Have you had enough water to drink? So we should have a check-in with ourselves at some point before we start the pre-flight check. So pre-flight yourself, determine that you are ready for flight, switch your brain into flight mode, and that means you are now ready to do the pre-flight check of the airplane, which is part of the flight. To do any pre-flight check, we want to use a checklist. A checklist can be a living document. The Sling TSi is an experimental, non-certified airplane. So it does have a POH from the factory, which is great, but you are free to create your own checklists and edit and modify it as you see fit. And that's great because developing a checklist and modifying a checklist makes you more connected to your airplane and allows you to recognize what the critical items are to make sure that it's going to be a safe flight. The checklist that we're using is one that we developed for the Sling TSi based on the POH. Note that the checklist can change over time. So by the time you're watching this video, there might be a newer checklist and this one might be superseded. So the bottom line is you follow the checklist. When it comes to checklists, there are different kinds of checklists. They don't all come in the same flavor. You get call and response checklists like you would have in the cockpit of an airliner, where one of the pilots calls out flaps and the other pilot calls out flaps down. This is not that kind of checklist. You also get checklists like shopping checklists, which are broccoli, and then you go find the broccoli and then you check it off. Cauliflower, go find the cauliflower and check it off. This is not one of those checklists either. The type of checklist that we use for a pre-flight check is a checklist. We check to see that we've done something that we've memorized with a flow. The reason why we don't want to pick out items one at a time on the checklist and then go and find them on the airplane is that it's kind of distracting when you're looking at a wing to now try to find your place on the list and then re-look at the wing. It's far better to get to know your airplane really well, to have a memorized flow that you follow around the airplane, and then at each sub-assembly, like left wing, you follow it up with a checklist and just go through the list one at a time and make sure that you had checked that item. And if you had not, go back and check the item that you forgot. We want to have it in hand, but we want to follow a flow as we go around the airplane and then just use the checklist just to make sure we haven't forgotten anything. During any pre-flight, there must be a point at which you look at the airplane from a distance, dead on, like from the back or from the front, centered, to make sure that the airplane is symmetrical. It's easy to start looking at the micro elements of a structure to make sure that it is all correct. But it's easy to miss a major problem. For example, we don't get it on the Sling TSi's, I haven't seen it, like a cracked landing gear, which would make the whole airplane tilt over to one side. You may not spot that by closely examining the landing gear, but if you stand back and take a look at the airplane, you'll notice that something is amiss. So standing about 30 or 40 feet away from the airplane, take a good look at the whole structure dead on to make sure it's symmetrical. First part of the pre-flight check according to our checklist is to check the interior of the airplane. To do that, we have to climb up onto the wing. And this is the beginning of where you got to make sure you are being focused and following procedures. Getting onto the Sling TSi wing is pretty easy. You can only stand on the black grip tape. When you have a passenger, it is important to make sure that they only stand on the black grip tape. You'll be amazed at how many people say that they've got it and then try to step right on the wing or lose their balance somewhat. So it's important to watch. It is also important that if you're loading up big passengers in the rear seats within the CG limits, that you don't load all the weight in the back without anyone in the front. It can make it fall on its tail. So make sure that you load someone in the front seat first and then load the back seats. It'll normally only do that if it's got very low fuel, but it is something that can happen if you overload the rear. So to get in, you place one foot on the step, hold onto the side of the canopy, and step right onto the grip tape. Pretty easy. Once we're standing on the wing, it's our opportunity to look inside the cabin, make sure everything that you need is there. If you have headsets, this is a good time to plug them all in. And this is also a great time to adjust the seats. The seats need to be adjusted before people get inside the airplane. And then we go to our pre-flight checklist. We turn the master switch on and we turn the EFIS switch on as well. At this point, the EFIS is going to boot up. And our next item on the checklist is to lower the flaps to full down. We do this so that we can inspect them during the pre-flight check. The EFIS is up. We're going to check the fuel quantity. So it says that we got 9 gallons indicated on the left side and 13 gallons indicated on the right side. We'll verify that by looking inside the fuel tank caps, but that's our first indication of how much fuel we've got and whether or not we have to add fuel. At this point, we don't need the avionics anymore, so we'll turn those off to save the battery and move on to checking the controls. We've got full left and right movement of the controls. We can see the ailerons moving. At this point, you can move the stick forward and aft and look out at the rear and see the elevator moving up and down. And it also gives us our initial view of the position of the trim tab, which we'll see indicated on the screen later on. This is also a great opportunity to clean the canopy so that your passengers can see outside the window without looking through too many bugs. And we can check that the fire extinguisher is on board. In this airplane, it's under the seat over here, and I can feel it's right there. And then importantly, we'll check that all the documentation is on board. And I can see in the little pouch there, we have the airworthiness certificate on display, and the registration and operating limitations and weight and balance are just behind it. And so is the loader if you use your airplane for training. So now we've checked the inside of the airplane, it's time to start on the wing. When you get off the Sling TSi, it's best to back up off the wing so that you don't trip on anything, and just feel for the step and then step down onto the ground. Pretty easy if you back up like that. Now we'll verify that we did everything on the cockpit check. We go through the checklist: lane A, B, master, flaps, fuel, master, controls, canopy, fire extinguisher, and documentation. I verified that I did everything. I didn't forget anything that time. So we can move on to the left wing. At this point, the only tool that you're going to need on the pre-flight is our Phillips head screwdriver and fuel strainer. This is the only tool we're going to need, so I'm going to stuff it in my back pocket so it's not bothering me, and get started on the wing. The flaps are in the down position now, which means we can see the nuts and the torque seal on all of the critical items. That's the flap push rod. That's the right amount of play that it has, and everything looks good. The condition of the flaps is good. We come here to the ailerons. The ailerons are on bearings, so they move real smoothly. And if we push it down, we can see the aileron push rod here, and everything looks like it's in place. The nut is on and the torque stripe has not moved. I just caution you, if you have your finger in here, make sure you're holding the aileron down so that a gust of wind nor someone yanking on the other aileron is going to chop your finger off. So just make sure that you're holding it down firmly. That has full movement. We come around to the wingtip here. If we were flying at night, I would make sure that all of the position lights are operative by turning them on. At this point, I kneel down to look at the undersurface of the wing. I'm looking at the shape of the tires. It's real easy to see if a tire is underinflated by the shape of it. And this is a great angle to take a look at the tires and see how they look, and also to look for any kind of sign of leaks underneath the wheels or underneath the wings. The light cover appears to be in good condition. From this point here, I can see that the top surface of the wing looks to be in good condition. We're not using these outboard extended tanks at this time, so we'll ignore those for now. And we'll open up the caps of the main wing fuel tanks. and I can see there's fuel in the tanks. There's visible fuel in this left tank, which means we have at least 12 gallons on the TSi. And then we'll reinstall the tank cap. And looking underneath the fuel tank here, we can see the fuel vent. Really important that that's not blocked. If this gets blocked, the engine may not be able to suck fuel out of the tanks. Just outboard here is the fuel drain for the extended tanks, which we're not using, so we won't check. And then under here is the pitot tube and angle of attack. This is a heated pitot for IFR and doesn't appear to be blocked, and the angle of attack is sensed by a little hole in the bottom over here. Moving further inboard over here, we have our first drain point. So we're gonna check the fuel, make sure that there's no sediment in it, make sure that there's no water in it, drain a good amount of fuel to make sure, and this is car gas, so it doesn't have a blue avgas color. So I'm gonna give it a sniff just to make sure this isn't entirely full of water. And then check your local regulations and either dump the fuel or put it back in the tanks. Putting it back in the tanks is not the greatest thing because you are going to reintroduce some debris. At this point, I'm going to look at the rear landing gear, and I'm going to look at the condition of the tire. I'm going to look to see if there's any leaking brake fluid, which would indicate a brake problem. And then because these wheel pants cover up the tires so nicely and any potential bald spots, it's a good idea to push the wheel through so that you can check the entire circumference of the tire for any sign of wear. And that's the end of the left wing. So at this point, I'm going to refer to my checklist and make sure that I haven't forgotten anything. And it checks out, so we'll continue. So moving further here, we have our left side engine door. This little door will pop up over here. And inside here, you can see the left side of the engine, which includes regulator A with these fins over here. You can see a lot of things that you can take a look at and make sure that they're in good condition. And then most importantly, the oil reservoir is here, so you can pull the cap off the oil reservoir. I like to place it upside down right on the top here. It's one way to make sure that you don't forget it. And then we're gonna check the oil level by pulling out the dipstick. And the oil has got to be anywhere in this flat portion of the dipstick. So right now it's below the lower portion. So I'm gonna stick the dipstick back in. And this is where we do what's called burping the engine. To burp the engine, grab the prop about 3/4 of the way out so you got good leverage, and then as slowly as possible push it in the direction of rotation. Here's the leading edge. Push it in the direction of rotation, real slow. The slower you go, the more of a steady pressure you put on all areas that are pushing oil through the engine, and this actually makes the oil exit the engine and go into the oil reservoir much quicker than if you try to do this real quickly. So now the oil is halfway up the flat part of the dipstick. It's a little difficult to see in this light, so we are good to go. Never add oil excessively. Always burp the engine to get your true oil level. And if it's anywhere in the flat part of the dipstick, you don't need to add oil. We're now going to reinstall the oil cap, make sure it has its good quarter turn click. Now we're going to close the engine door, fasten it back with this screwdriver, and stick it back in our pocket and move to the front of the airplane. Over here we can check the security of the exhaust, make sure it's not hot. Looks pretty secure. Now we're going to look at the airplane from the front. We're going to check the condition of the blades one at a time. The blades look like they're free of cracks and any other kind of damage. It is common for there to be a little bit of damage in the gel coat of the prop from impacting water or sand. Anything that's just on the skin of the prop is normally not a concern. Next, we're going to check the spinner, make sure it doesn't have any movement, make sure all the fasteners are on. And then it's a good time to kneel down and take a look at all the intakes. We have air intakes up there, we have an oil cooler here, we have a water radiator down here, and everything looks free and clear. And over here you can actually pull down on the roots of the prop and check the nose suspension and make sure it has good movement. We're also taking a look at the front tire. It looks like it has good inflation, and we can push the airplane forward and back to make sure that it has good tread all around the tire. And this looks good. Moving to the right side of the engine here, we've got the turbo intercooler inlet over here, and further down here we're going to pull out our fuel tester again. We have our gasculator, so we're going to take a little sample here. And it looks good, smells good, and I'm not sure how it tastes, but I'm happy with that. And we're going to open the right engine compartment door here. We can see the coolant overflow bottle. As long as it's on the bottom line, it's good to go. And that level will actually increase in flight when the engine's hot. And then it'll get sucked back in when the engine cools down. And then a little further back here, we have the brake fluid. It's red in color. And you want to make sure that there's some quantity of brake fluid in there. You can also see the intercooler for the turbocharger. You can see some fuel lines. This is the fuel filter. The fuel pumps are in there. And you can take a general look around the engine compartment and make sure that everything looks like it's in order, and it does. So now we're going to pull out our trusty checklist and we're going to check what we've just done. And the cowling, checked and secure, prop and spinner, nose gear, suspension, air intakes, radiators, oil and coolant. We didn't forget anything, so that portion is complete. The right wing pre-flight is almost exactly the same as the left wing, so complete the checklist for the right wing next. Okay, now that we've completed the right wing, I'm going to use the checklist to verify that I did everything. And we drained the fuel, we checked the fuel cap, fairings, leading edge, ailerons, flaps, main gear. We completed everything, so right wing is complete. And we now move on to the fuselage and we're going to resume our flow. Up top here, we've got the parachute cover. That looks like it's secure. It's also got a little bit of waterproof sealant on here. That all looks fine. The static ports on this airplane are over here, so we're checking that the static ports are not blocked. Comm antenna's up there. Looking underneath the fuselage, the transponder antenna is up ahead between the landing gear, and that looks like it's in good condition. And so we'll keep moving backwards. We want to check that the tail fairings are all secure. All the fasteners are in. We'll come back to the horizontal tail. We check the motion, which we've already checked in the cockpit of the elevator. And then one by one, we check all the fasteners. We've got a nut and we've got some torque stripe. And then we look at the vertical tail. The skin surface looks like it's in good condition. The VOR antenna and all the fasteners and torque seal for the rudder are in place. We check the rudder cables and their nuts and safeties are on. The condition of the rudder cables is good. There's no fraying of these cables. And we look inside this hole in the rear fuselage to make sure that the nut is on the elevator push rod, and it is. We look at the condition of all the tail surfaces. These are the most likely to take a knock when the airplane's getting pushed, so making sure there's no dents or dings. The left side of the elevator, we check the nuts. I like to feel them with my fingers. A lot of the pre-flight, you want to really touch what you are checking, because your touch can tell you a lot about what's going on versus eyesight. We want to take a look at the trim tab, and it has a safety on it and everything looks like it's intact. We have a split pin on here. Looking down over here, we've got the other rudder cable and everything looks good. And moving further forward on the fuselage, we have the other static port which looks clear, and these are in different locations with different iterations of the TSi. And then further forward over here we have the baggage door, and that looks locked and secure. And that brings us back to where we started. So we're going to check our checklist. We check static ports, we check parachute housing, fairing, vertical, horizontal, elevator, rudder, tie down, and left static port. We have completed the pre-flight checklist of the Sling TSi, and we're back where we started. We made a full circle around the airplane. We checked it from far, we checked it up close, and we had a really good look at the airplane. And hopefully the whole pre-flight experience has been kind of a meditation, so that by the time you get on board, you're ready to have a great flight and be totally on top of your game. If you have any comments about how you like to do a pre-flight, or any comments about this pre-flight, please leave them in the comment section of this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.